I'm delighted we've got Kevin Dyer with us today. And I'm just going to highlight why he's here. He's a playwright with over 60 commissioned plays under his belt, a number of very distinguished awards and nominations, including this year's Best Play for the Writers' Guild, Syrian Baker. And in the past, he's also won the Best Play for Young Audiences for The Monster Under the Bed. Which year was that, Kevin?
I think 2016, I think, or maybe 2017.
Yeah. So he's had a long and obviously glorious history with us as a guild, but he's also a very accomplished theatre practitioner across the spectrum, with a whole litany of directorial achievements. He's been an actor in several pieces. Your own pieces?
No, I used to be a jobbing actor. I used to do TV soaps, TV dramas, all that sort of stuff, as well as theatre, touring theatre especially. I love touring theatre. Okay,
and you've been involved, in a sense, in a kind of teaching role as a dramaturg and a mentor, working with other writers.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll touch on a number of these things, but I won't go through the whole litany of your achievements because we'll have no time for you yourself, I think, because it is an amazing CV, I think, extraordinary. Now, I've got some pressing questions I want to ask you, Kevin, but as Kate already mentioned, during our interview, the first part of our interview, please key in any questions you would like me to look at in the chat. And I might even interleave some of those as we go along, but I'll certainly find some time at the end of the interview for Kevin to answer those. But maybe before we get underway properly, I think it's quite good. You can, to some extent, see the backgrounds that we have in the rooms that we're in. But I think it's quite nice to know where a writer is, where home is, Kevin. So can you tell us a bit where your home is?
I live in a little village in North Wales. I live in a medieval house. And outside there's lots of greenery and sheep.
Okay. And how long have you been there?
Well, born and bred in the West Midlands, Peaky Blinders country, and then I went to university in Scotland to get as far away from my parents as I possibly could, and then I went to Wales. Again, I was interested in living on the edges of Britain rather than being in the bit in the middle where there was no fresh air. So I've been here on and off. I've been more in Wales than I have anywhere else now.
Yeah. And I think the part of Wales you're in is probably quite a strong Welsh-speaking area, is it?
Yeah, we're just on the sort of cusp of Welsh and English speaking. I did used to live further west, so my children were brought up through the language, through the medium of Welsh. And
do you have any grasp of it yourself?
Yeah, I learned Welsh, and I've led workshops in Welsh.
Well, you see, I've learned something about you already that, because I have to say, Kevin and I, in various forms and through association, go back quite a long way. And we've certainly come through the same kind of journey in terms of getting to where we are, through community theatre, children's theatre, and for young people. But the main sort of drive that led to this interview was the fact that we awarded you, the Guild awarded you this year, the Best Play for the Syrian Baker. So maybe a good place to start is to talk a bit about that. But before I refer over to you, Kevin, perhaps I'll just try and outline what the play was about and why I think it is a really distinguished piece. 3 actors tell the story of Jamal, his wife, a friend, and how they came to the UK, all while baking real bread and making mezza in front of us in real time. It's partly a tribute to the wonderful Syrian baker who supported Jamal as a child, who himself made fantastic bread, but then lost his life. So Jamal wants to go back and do the same for his people in the same way when he gets that opportunity in that war-torn country. And it's a play about life in Syria, both before and after the Troubles. It's a love story. It's a refugee story. This all makes it sound possibly a bit bleak. It's not at all. It's dark at times, of course, but it's also very funny, human, and incredibly humane. What it communicates is how similar we all are, and how much we have in common, which it does brilliantly. And the metaphor of bread making, which is shared with the audience, is perfection. So, and those actually aren't my words, Kevin, although I've read the play and I agree with every one of those, but that was the report back from one of our judges about the play. So perhaps, I mean, I may have got some of the nuances of the story wrong there. Is there any corrections there, first of all, or anything, important elements that I've missed in terms of that very concise synopsis?
It's just nice to have somebody who likes your work, isn't it? That's the bottom line. But no, in fact, I wrote a first draft of this play, and the commissioner said, we don't need to do what the BBC is doing. We don't need to do reportage. We need to try and write a play of hope for the world, that change can come. So when I moved on to second draft and later drafts, I did keep saying, I have to tell the truth. I have to dip into the real stuff of Syria. But we have to believe that things can get better. And that's what the central character does. I put that belief in the heart of the central character of the play, that things can get better.
And just tell us a little bit more about the journey, the process, the writing process, where you first got that moment of conception, and then how you took it forward and how it became the play it is.
Okay, I'm interested in outsiders. I've been an outsider since I was about 13 myself. You know, I was a working class kid, lived on a council estate. The rest of my family were manual workers, and suddenly along came me, a kid who was interested in wearing women's clothes and earrings and writing poetry. And you know, D.H. Lawrence wrote a poem, I think, as well, you know, we are the in-betweeners, that stuck between two classes. That's how he and his sister felt. And I felt the same. And then I went to Scotland, and I was an outsider, and I've come to Wales, and even though I've learned the language, I'm still an outsider. And some years ago, I worked in Iran and got to know a lot of Iranian people who were leaving, who were moving. Often, many of them aren't there anymore. So for about 18 years now, I have Iranian friends who are who have no country anymore, who have no home anymore. And then I wrote a play about former Yugoslavia, about people leaving Yugoslavia, and that was probably whenever that was, 20 years ago. And it sort of stuck with me, this thing about what happens to us when we have nowhere to go. And then I met a Syrian man who was talking to me about what was happening in Syria, and he just said to me, "Don't forget Syria. Do not forget us. And when you go home, you tell your friends. Don't let them forget us." And that came about the same time when Gavin Stride from Farnham Maltings came across this story of a Syrian man who went back to Syria to break bread. So, you know, sometimes things just come together, don't they?
And maybe I got this wrong, Kevin. Didn't you say you wrote it in story prose to begin with? Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I work quite a lot with Farnham Maltings, and every year they have a creative retreat, and it's a fantastic time. We go away for 4 or 5 days, and while I was there, I wrote, I wrote if you like, some of the prose sections of. I wrote the story out in prose, little bits of it, and some of those are in the play in slightly different forms.
And there was another piece called Idlib. And how are they? Tell us a bit about Idlib and how they may or may not relate.
Idlib is one of the stories. Idlib is the story at the very end of the Syrian Baker, where the man goes back to Syria to bake bread. And in its prose form, it was shortlisted for the Brick Lane Short Story Prize, but also it was also commissioned as a short film by an arts organisation in Chester. So actually on my website there's a short film of a fantastic actress called Paisley Reed doing this one-person monologue, which is it's a prose story, and it appears in a play and it appears in print. I'm really interested in how we shift stories through different media and what happens to them when we do that. You know, what we have to leave out or what we have to put in. It's like safe playtime for a writer, isn't it? Because we know the story. We don't have to do the hard bit thinking up the story. We've just got to rearrange the words. But we're still making new stuff. So it's good fun for me.
And does that describe a kind of typical process journey for you, or is there no such thing?
What's the process? Find the story, then tell the story. But I think each time it is different, I think, often depending on who I work with. Because I try and tell people who commission me, I will not write a play for you, but I will write a play with you. In that I try and understand what the company and their audience want. Some people often think that they often say, "Oh, so you're at home and thinking up a play and writing it, aren't you?" And I said, "No, it doesn't. I don't usually start like that. I start because I have a conversation with somebody, or so I'm writing it often with a commissioner or with a dramaturg or with a devising company. I think I still have the responsibility to be the writer, but I'm quite happy to open up the process.
And would you write a significant dialogue and scenes when you're in the middle of that process with the company, or do you need to come away, give some distance, and come back to the quiet of your own home to do it, or can you write on the hoof? I mean, I think those things are quite interesting for people as they are approaching a career.
When I first started writing plays, I started at the beginning. I started on scene 1 and I just started writing, and I got stuck into the dialogue. But the plays were pretty poor, to be honest. They were very poor. And I thought, actually, this isn't the way to write a play. And there's a statistic, isn't there, that there are 29,478 novels unfinished in people's drawers just because they've never worked out the ending. So now I try and work out the ending. And also I try and storyline. I try and do that. But I'm doing a project now with a lovely little company up in Newcastle called Curious Monkey. And I'm working with them and doing some workshops with actors. And I don't know what the play's about yet, but I have written some scenes. I've written some scenes to feel my way in, but also to show to the company, to say, hey, look, this is what I'm going to be doing in this project.
But do you write those scenes in the quiet and seclusion of your own world, or can you write that in the melee of workshop and when you're staying away and whatever?
All over the place. My son who's now in the circus, I took him to gymnastics for years and years and years, 3 nights a week, 3 hours a week. So it was an hour to get there, 3 hour gymnastics, an hour to get back. So I sat in Marks and Spencer's cafe You know, I've written a lot of plays in Marks and Spencer's Cafe in Wrexham. Because if you don't use those times, it'll never get written. That's what I
Well,
find.
I can really relate to that, because at various times when I've got absolutely stuck and I've hit the roadblock, I will go to a cafe, and I've even said to myself, the next person who walks in the door is the next person who walks into my play. And just it's that kind of playing that you do with yourself. And seriously, on two occasions, that has been the next person that walked into my play.
We hear about. I think I'm very envious of novelists. Those novelists who get up, have a cup of good coffee, and they write either for 5 hours, or they're going to do their 2,000 words, and then they stop. But every day they have that discipline. I don't know whether that's a fiction, but that's what novelists always tell me that they do. Right. I don't have that discipline myself.
Right. No. All right. Let's pull back a bit and have a slightly broader view of Kevin. You know, just going through the statistics of your career, it's fairly phenomenal. You know, 60 commissioned plays, you've worked for radio, you've done all these other things in theatre, you've done a certain amount of teaching and mentoring and what have you. But you came in it through community theatre more, through children's theatre, and that's what I very much relate to, because that's kind of the world that I entered myself. And I see those as the hard yards to learn what you do. And a lot of the time you're given a fairly kind of tight brief. You know, you might be told by the theatre company, we can't afford more than 3 or 4 actors. We've got to get it in the set into the back of a transit van and so on and so forth. Can you try and explain how much that was a handicap to you, but probably more relevant, how in a way that taught you the essence of theatre?
Well, it's funny how we end up where we end up, isn't it? I think what happened to me was that I worked as an actor, and actors can't say no. So, do you want to do this job, Kevin? Yes. Or my agent would say, they've offered you the job, do it. It was very hard when I had an agent who was a fascist, who just wanted a lot of money, to say no to anything. So I just got in that habit of saying yes to things. And it just meant that things continue along the path that you sort of find yourself on. What happened for me was, as an actor, I worked at Derby Playhouse, in their main house in their studio, but they had an education company as well. So I did main house show, studio show, education show. And then I just got involved with them, and the young people's movement there was very strong and very political. And I was interested in making work that was about something. There was a time when the education movement in Britain was the place where we could talk about race, and we could talk about gender, and we could talk about skin color and differences of faith, and we could talk about Central America when nobody else was talking about it. It was a really interesting place to be. And I think I'm not saying I got stuck there, but people would just offer and I would say yes, and then I would say yes. And really, I probably should have had a mentor who says, Kevin, now's the time for you to think about broadening your strategy. And I never did that. But I do want to say,
it's not clearly not been an inhibition, say with the Syrian Baker, for the significance and importance of the subject and the scale of the subject that you cover, having just 3 actors on the stage and so on and so forth. So in some ways, those disciplines and those constrictions, I think, can be a great strength to you.
Yeah, and I think I love theatre. I love that close-up thing we have with the actors in theatre. I love the live thing. Well, you know, those first theatre experiences I had changed my life. When I first saw Waiting for Godot when I was 15, I saw something that was off from a different planet. You know, we were a family, we would sit down, and every time we ate, the TV was on, And we just watched the screen and watched the screen and watched the screen. And then I saw theatre. And I thought, oh, you can have characters unlike all those other media. It's a different world, isn't it? And I haven't, so I've never been tempted really to go to write for screen, because I just love what we can do in theatre.
And it has to be said that writers, by and large, are fairly highly regarded, and we have some kind of standing in the theatre that is not necessarily true in TV or screen or whatever, unless you're an auteur or whatever.
I think it depends on the company, doesn't it? Really, I also love the rehearsal process as a writer or an actor or a director. I love that time that you get together, that 3 weeks, that 4 weeks, where you can talk about characters and story and the world. I know from working as a TV actor, you would often turn up, run the scene once and film it. I always felt when I worked in TV that I was always unemployed, even though I was earning 4 times as much as I ever worked when I worked in the theatre.
Just, you mentioned, in a sense, the word political. And I asked you, did you see yourself as a political animal when we had a pre-chat before this? How important are your political beliefs, and do they in some way charge, you know, are they a sort of battery charge to what you do?
I think everybody looks at the way the world works, and they either roll over with it, or they ignore it, or they try and do something about it. I think here we are as writers, and what's happening in Ukraine or what was happening in Syria, I can't be a writer and not write about that stuff. I can't be a writer and not write about the position of people in the society that we have. We have to have a little tussle with it. But at the same time, you know, I remember when I was young, I watched Boys from the Black stuff on the TV, and I thought, oh, this is great. This is a piece that's about something, and it's funny. That's the gold thing for me. If we can engage people and make them think, I'm having a good time, I'm having a good time, I'm really having a good time. Oh, but that shouldn't happen in the world.
Yeah.
Then I think we're starting as writers.
Equally, if you're in an audience and the piece, you feel that the piece is preaching to you, is didactic, that's anathema too, isn't it?
Oh God, I hate it. I hate writers when they do that. Because in the end, when I go to the theatre, the last person I want to hear is the writer. I don't want to hear the writer, no matter how famous they are, no matter how many awards they won. I just want to watch the characters in their world, don't I? I hate those preachy things.
And that comes onto another subject that sort of is in the background of the Syrian Baker, and I mentioned before, is some people might query, you know, why are you, white, you know, aging middle-aged man, writing, you know, British, writing about a very particular ethnic community in Syria. It's not part of your immediate lived or rooted lived experience. So what made you feel that you could give voice to that?
One, because I met a Syrian man who told me that I must, because he was never going to write the story. He couldn't write the story. It was impossible for him. And I do other types of work where I work with young people, especially, and again, this young people's movement, this TIE movement, I think we've been working for a wider variety of voices telling stories for 30 odd years, 40 years, 50 years, all that work that Theatre Centre did nearly 50 years ago. But I think we can write about anything so long as we do it authentically. And I think we have to write about everything that comes up. You know, people from Southeast Asia, that came across in a refrigerated lorry and died as part of the whole big immigration thing that Britain's going through. Somebody has to write about it. Somebody has to write about it. And we can't always wait for people to write their own stories. It's fabulous now in Britain, isn't it, that there are so many writers of color. It's great. It's happening now. It's happening.
And I think it's very interesting.
And just one thing. And the problem of race in the UK, it is for us all to sort out. I can't just leave it to my colleagues from the West Indies.
Well, I think another interesting thing that the Writers Guild had what we call the Literary Managers Forum, an event we do every year up in York just before lockdown. I think it was late 2019, and we had a very mixed group of professional, practitioners there, writers, actors, and all sorts. And the day really took off with a huge debate. And there were a lot of South Asian writers there, particularly women. There's some very strong women, South Asian writers there. And they said they equally didn't want to be ghettoized into writing just about South Asian people or whatever, or from their own culture. They wanted the freedom to write in the way that you describe about the things that you want to and need to write about.
Yeah, and I also know there are some things that I can't write about because I just don't know enough about it. I hate the phrase lived experience. I just hate it. But I haven't lived through some stuff, and I can't research it. I can't find out about it. A friend of mine, she's a displaced person from Iran, and she has said to me, "You will never understand. You will never understand what it's like." And I accept that. I do accept that. I wrote a play called The Bomb, which is about Jo Berry and her relationship with Pat McGee. Jo Berry is the daughter of, her dad was killed in the Brighton bomb, and Patrick McGee was the ex-IRA man who planted the bomb. And actually, I know none of them, but I wrote a play. I just had to talk to them a lot and get their trust and their permission to write the story. I think that's useful for me. I think makes me feel a bit more comfortable if I feel I have the permission from.
Yeah. Just moving on a bit, but embracing this time of life that you're in writing is we open our applications for the best play this last time round for 2 years, and I have to say Kevin Dyer submitted 6 plays, all of which had either been produced or published, and I suspect they were produced within that 2-year span from September 2019. And I said to you when we talked the other day, I said, gosh, this looks like a very purple passage for you in your life. You also said, not boasting at all, you said that you thought you were writing better. You were writing better stuff now than you have ever done in your life. Is there any correlation there, either in terms of the times we've been through COVID, which has been a really challenging time for theatre, but also in terms of your age or any other elements that you think have led to that?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying I'm any good. I just do my best. I think that's one thing I know now, that writing plays gets harder. So I work harder at them now. I rewrite more. I'm more demanding of myself. But I do think, I'm probably like everybody who's here, we're all at the top of their game, aren't we? We're all better now than we were 10 years ago because we've got 10 years of experience, 10 years of thinking. We're all better now than we always were.
But I mean, to be able to submit 6 plays, all of which that are current during those 2 years, is quite something. I mean, clearly something about this period of time or just before it has been very productive for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think before lockdown came and before everything stopped, before I had a play taken off the road and another play that just went nowhere because the company ceased to function. I was busy, and I tried to be busy because sometimes artistic directors or people who run companies, they sort of want me to spend 8 or 10 months writing their play. And I say, I'll spend 8 or 10 months in your play if you give me 8 or 10 months of your salary to write it. But actually, for what we get paid to write a play, you think, well, actually, I have to write for a year. I have to write to pay the mortgage or something like that. That's the fact, isn't it?
Yeah, and that is incredibly challenging, and it could be a very weary voice saying that to me now, Kevin. But you don't come over as weary. You come over still as being very charged up with it all. I
love it. I just love it. You know, some people use the R word with me. They say, Kevin, when are you going to retire? And I go, well, one, I work in the arts, so it's virtually impossible to do so, because when I was young, nobody ever used the P word, pension, to me. So we just keep going, don't we?
Yeah. Until
I come and knock on your door and say, can I live in your spare room, please?
I'll keep it vacant for you. Don't worry, Kevin.
Thank
you. Just to say, we're kind of moving at least sort of more than halfway through our session here. Could people, I noticed there, I can't see anything on chat, but please, if you have any pressing questions you'd like to ask of Kevin, then please put them in the chat and I'll relay them to him as I can.
Can I just say one thing here?
Yeah.
I'm actually quite a quiet, laid back person, but when we come to writing, I can get quite fierce. Because I think plays are very hard things to write, aren't they? They slip through our fingers and they easily become like uncontrollable monsters. So when I work on a play, I get it's this is what the character does in the first scene. This is the shape of the play. I get a bit with myself. I get a bit pushy with myself to make them work.
And do you think that determination and that focus is something that you fight your corner for more strongly now than ever?
Just ask that question again for me, please.
Well, what I'm saying is, I think when I was younger and a bit callow, and the director said, "Oh, I don't like that scene," or "We ought to change that," and I remember Dave Holman, a very experienced playwright, when I interviewed him, said that often theatre companies don't allow the play that you presented them to go through the hoops before they want to change things, and before they start manipulating it or putting their version of what they want. And I think it's only with experience that you can defend your corner for that.
That's true. I sometimes, I work with a director sometimes, and they let the actors read it once, and then they want to start changing things. And I say, give them a break. Let the actors have another go, because the scene is made up with my work and the actor's work, and the director's work and the designer's work, but I have to let the actors make mistakes, I think 2, 3, 4 times. And then we can start to go, oh, this section of the scene isn't working. But I do know, because I direct my own work. When I direct my own work, I change chunks of it. I throw bags of it away. And I rewrite stuff and I move scenes around. So it obviously means that my work isn't quite as ready for the rehearsal room as I sometimes think it is. And I often say, I don't mind my work being changed so long as they change it for the better, but that's a bit of a challenge for a director.
But I mean, it's written into our own contracts that the final word in terms of the text should be with the writer.
It is, and I'm really glad that's there. However, I think everybody in the room, if they're all trying to tell the same story, And if they keep looking back to the writer, because whose responsibility is the script? It's the writer, isn't it? So we can have a conversation about a scene, we can identify a problem with the scene, and then we can look to the writer.
Great. Now I've got some questions coming through now, Kevin. So perhaps you'll address these if you would. So Erica says, what steps do you follow to attract a steady flow of commissions?
Well, I've never, ever, ever been to a party to meet somebody to further my career. So I strongly suggest that people go to parties and meet people to further their career. I think what I do is I understand that theatre companies need us as much as we need them. So I'm quite happy to write to someone and say, hey, I've got an idea. Also, I've written a lot of plays, but I have some long-term relationships with companies. Joe Sumption at the Dukes, he said about somebody once, oh, the director has found their writer. And I think that relationship is really important. And sometimes you just find a director that likes you and your work. And that means that you end up writing a number of times for them over the years. It's about finding that relationship where you have a similar view of the world or a similar view of what the audience want.
And I think behind that question is to do with the kind of momentum, especially early in your career. How do you build any kind of momentum? And just my sort of addition to that really is that if you've got something on at any point, even if it's a reading or whatever, then try and, if someone's shown any interest in your work, then try and get them along while the going's good. Because once that production or reading is over, it's been consigned to memory. So you have to somehow keep that momentum going to some degree, or at least if you've got some momentum going, then try and keep it going.
Yeah, when I was young, sometimes I'd get contact with people, and to be honest, I was a bit lazy. I never followed them up because I didn't really quite know I was a writer then. I thought I was probably still an actor then. But I think if someone shows an interest in your work, that's what you're working for, isn't it? You're working for somebody to show an interest in your work. So if they do, get the draft to them as soon as you can.
Okay. Victoria, she says, if you felt frightened that your subject may ostracize you professionally, even socially, would you pursue creating that piece? And if so, how would you navigate it?
I think there have been stories over the last few years, haven't there, where people have been persecuted for their beliefs. Oh, that's probably been going on through the whole history of humankind, hasn't it? But I think as writers, we are quite vulnerable in a world of social media.
Just out of interest, do you engage in social media? Do you run Twitter?
I Facebook, but I don't do the other ones. I don't do the other ones.
Okay.
I think we have to write what we have to write. We have to write what we think needs writing. I think also when we write, we have to be kind. Often people say to me, I want to write a story about so-and-so, but they're still alive. And I sometimes go, well, are you going to make their life better or worse by writing this piece of stuff?
Yeah, well, just expand on that. You need to be kind.
Well, I think kind to the. For me, I have to try and make the world a better place. When I go to the shops and I talk to somebody in the shops, I'm trying to make the world a better place. I'm not doing it for Jesus. I'm doing it because I believe in society. And I believe that we are all part of society and our work is part of society. So when I make a piece of work, I'm all the time thinking, how is this going to be received by people? How is it? if let's say I'm writing a piece that's for a rural tour and two neighbors are going to be watching it, I'm conscious of their relationship. So I do believe we have to be responsible, but I think if we have to write something that needs to be said, we have to write it. And that's the balance we're trying to make, isn't it? Let's go straight on this. There are people in my family I have huge political disagreements with them. What do I do about it? I have to try and stay true to myself without shooting them.
But you have to do a bit of listening to them as well, don't you, Kevin?
Yes, yeah, we do. But when we write, with the listening's over, isn't it? Writing is
I see that. I see what you mean. Well, on the audience thing, interesting question from Kathleen. Do you sometimes have discussions with the audience after the play? And I would add to that, what part do they play in you reconnecting with the work that you do, or reconfiguring what you do?
There are times in the process when we have to listen. Before it gets to the audience, I'm a great believer in sharing my work and hearing what people say, because I'd rather I found out it was crap before it got to the audience. I really love people reading my work and telling me where they trip up on it, or the bits they like. I think we need to know the bits we like. As for the audience, I always say to writers, go and see your work, and sometimes we only get to see a play we've put on once, but the first time we go and watch it, we're so scared inside. The adrenaline and everything is inside, so we can't really intelligently watch our own play. But by the time
when you go to a first night, do you audience watch? Do you look and see how they're reacting to various parts of the play?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely. But I also know from being a director and an actor that audiences are very different every night. So often an actor will come off and they'll say, oh, we were terrible tonight. The audience was so quiet. And I said, well, it doesn't matter whether they were quiet or whether they clapped. You can't tell how good you were by the response of the audience. You can to some extent, obviously. If they're standing up at the end and clapping, well, it might just mean you told them what they wanted to hear. Back to that earlier question.
And Sue, kind of on the back of that, hooks on the back of that, do you attend first nights, and if so, do you rewrite on the basis of audience reaction? Which is, you kind of answered that in a way.
Absolutely yes. Like after seeing the Syrian Baker, when I saw it in a village hall, and what's the phrase? It was very well received, but it was very flawed. So I did work on it again. I thought,
and was that you just being in the chemistry of an audience watching the play? So you're watching the play and also watching audience reaction to what's going on.
Yeah, I remember that evening they watched and they watched and they watched, but I think that was as much the subject matter and the actors rather than me. I could still have done my job a bit better, so I did. So I got back to my laptop and did my job a bit better.
And then got the company in to re-rehearse bits.
If you can. I remember I used to work at Nottingham Playhouse, and they used to open a show for 3 or 4 days, then take it off the road, take it off for 2 days, and go back and rework.
Yeah, which is, I think, a very healthy thing. Not always practical for companies, but it's a good notion.
But like Farnham Maltings are redoing Syrian Baker this autumn, and I said to Gavin Stride, who's the artistic director, he said, we want to do the play. I said, that's great, but I need to do some rework on it before you do it again. I need to do that rework.
Angela, she says, how much time do you work with a theatre company compared to working from home? How do you juggle the two? We kind of covered that to a degree, but there is often a balance there that you need. You need time sometimes away from, as I say, the melee of the company, to consider what you're doing in some reflection?
Yeah, I have written in the rehearsal space. I have done that. Whilst the actors are there, but I think I do need time at home. Just me and a table and biscuits. I think I need time at home, and I usually say to myself, "What's today's target?" I'll write one scene today. That's enough. And tomorrow I'll write another one.
And do you work office hours, or do you get up and do early mornings, or are you a night bird?
Yeah, to be honest, it depends on all the other administration stuff that comes in our life. Because while I'm writing this play, there's somebody else from another project saying, "Oh, can you just write some publicity?" Today, before coming here, I've been with the theatre company doing a health and safety meeting. So all the time, the big thing for me is to not make writing go at the bottom of the list.
And that's sometimes very hard, isn't it?
Very hard. Everything will push it out the way. Our own reluctance because it's so difficult, but also all the other demands of family and relationships. And
there was a series years ago called with George Colin called "Don't Forget to Write," and the whole comedy of that was him trying to discover any form of distraction to keep him away from the desk.
I think it's make a date with the desk. That's the thing, isn't it? Make a date with the desk.
Lou here says, any advice on making connections with theatres directors remotely? I live on a small island with only one public theatre, so can't build face-to-face relations.
I really appreciate that. I say I live in North Wales and I'm a long way from theatres. And I think we have to, what can we do? We have emails, I think we have to develop we have to develop calling cards sometimes. I think that's what our work is. I often say to people, you've got to write this play, you've got to write this full-length play, even if it never gets put on, but you have to be able to show it to people so they know you can write a full-length play. And so they know you can handle characters and story.
There's a kind of syndrome now, and I think it really is a prevalent one over the last maybe 10 years, where emerging writers will get theatre companies who are prepared to do scratch nights or maybe a public reading of their play, but they subsequently find themselves in a kind of development purgatory and never get there. Any advice to how you kind of push it beyond that?
A little rant first, of course, because why are theatre companies doing that? I don't think in the end it's because they're really interested in writers. These people that we work for, they are only interested in themselves. Let's just get that, you know. They're only interested in their own brand, either as an individual or as a theatre company. I can say that because we're a group of writers. So so this thing about putting on reading after reading after reading after reading, it's really about them saying, hey, aren't we a creative organization and doing lovely things for all the writers in our region? Now, that's a bit of a lie, what I'm saying, isn't it? But I know there's truth in that. I think at some point we have to say, I've done 4 readings of this play now. I'm interested in you taking the relationship with me seriously. You have to find other ways of saying that. But that's where we have to go, isn't it?
Yeah. And if it's a genuine relationship, the person that you're dealing with or the company you're dealing with will need to listen to you then and realize that, you know, in a way you've hit the buffers on development and you want something, you want a real audience and a real production. And
I think similarly, if they say we're doing a reading, have a conversation with them about what the reading is for. Do we read the whole play? Do we just read the first 3 scenes, which are a bit sticky, and then have a conversation? Or do we answer the question that really needs answering? Let's not just put the reading on in the same sort of pattern that we've been doing in this theatre for 15 years. What's the objective of the reading? For whom? Somebody has to be asking those questions, I think. Like, you might say, I just need to hear it in somebody else's voices other than my own. And that'll be great. Thank you very much. And that's good, isn't it? You know, if that happens. But then once you've done it, you then have to meet again with the people who did the reading and say, okay, well, help me a bit more if you can.
And there's an increasing kind of onus, I think, on writers to be more proactive in terms of getting to production, whether it's getting scratch companies together themselves or setting up a company of their own and so on and so forth. And then they become kind of producers as well. Where do you sit with that?
It's all about control, isn't it? When we collaborate, there is a giving up of control, or when we give our script to other people, we give up some control. So there is, when we produce our own work, we do keep control in some sort of way, and some of us like that. But it is enormously time consuming and hard work, because you have to become a producer. Or I work with lots and lots of people. I work with poets as well. And they all say, I want a producer. I want a producer. And I say, oh, what you need, you want someone to do the dirty work for you, don't you? Someone to do all that.
You've directed your own plays, have you not?
I have, but only for companies. I've never, oddly enough, I do have my own small company now, but I've never written and directed for it. But I've never really done the producing bit of it.
I have to say, because I, as chair of the theatre committee, we have regular meetings with the Arts Council and the director of the Arts Council, Neil Darlison, director of theatre, and it seems to me that the Arts Council, in terms of their funding, is moving more and more to trying to find artists who will be also, you know, entrepreneurs as well, and find ways to production of their own work. And I have to say, I can't help but think that is a bit misguided, but that is to some extent the climate we're in.
I think the glory of theatre is its breadth and its diversity. And you know, I love people that just write really good plays, and I'm interested in people that make work in other ways. And I'm interested in people who design and write together. And I'm interested in people who can write and direct. I quite like people who do more than one thing. I remember Sue Hill used to work for Knee High, and you know, she designs and she performs and she designs gardens. You know, we become interesting people when we do more than one thing. So I am interested in that. But I'd like people to do it out of choice rather than because they're on 12 different
and one of the things you do learn coming the way into theatre that both of us did was how collaborative an art it is, how much just part of that group of people you are as the writer, whether it's, you know, the MD, the actors, the director, whoever. You're just one cog in that whole kind of machine, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, and all those people are important human beings with their own lives. Sometimes actors who come from some of the acting schools, they think it's all about them. When I used to direct at the Dukes in Lancaster, when actors came up from the south, I would say 2 things. One, welcome to the north where real theatre is made. That was just to rile them a bit. But also I'd introduce them to the people in the theatre that was their whole lives. You know, the people in the costume department, that was their life. They'd been there for 15 years. So don't think that this job is about you. You know, this job is actually for the community.
Just a final question from Stefan here. He asks, are you mentoring any young writers at the moment? And can you say a little about that side of your work?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I work for Theatre Factory, who are based up in Barrow, and I often mentor their writers. I work for Action Transport Theatre, and I don't teach writing. I run writing projects where I support young people to write work and understand who they are. And I work as a mentor for one of the people here who's really, really one of the best writers that I know. And what's my job? My job is to support, as a human to a human, as somebody who understands how difficult it is, how damn difficult it is to be a freelancer in the arts industry. But also, from those very worst plays that I did, those terrible plays that I wrote when I was just beginning, because I knew nothing about it. Since then, I've tried to work out how to write plays a bit better. So I think I do try and talk about structure and character and how to write a scene and those things as well. So I think mentoring has that broader thing, the technical stuff, the human stuff, and the mix of it.
Well, that's brilliant. Just briefly before we sign off, what commission or work are you looking forward to and getting involved with now?
Well, I think I'm always interested in the thing I'm writing now. That's the one. Oddly enough, I've got 5 plays that are out there or just about to happen.
Of course you have.
Because they take a long time, actually, don't they? A play sometimes takes 2 or 3 years. I wrote a play for YPT in Toronto 4 years ago, and it still hasn't gone on yet because they had to close the theatre for 3 years. So for me, that's still a live play that we're going to develop and get on. But I'm working with Curious Monkey, who are based up in the Northeast, and I did a session with them last night, a group of young people who all live in care. They're in the care system, and I'm working with them to write a play about what it's like to be 18 and living in care. I've never been in care in my life. I remember being 18, but only vaguely. Am I allowed to write that play? I don't know, but they asked me to, so I am. And I will try my damnedest to make those young people who have told me their stories feel that it is their story.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. You still seem to me to have the energy of an 18-year-old, if I might say so, which is terrific.
I'm not dead yet. I'm hanging on. That's what we can do, guys. Just hang on.
Great. Just before I sign off and hand back to Kate, I'd just like to mention a project that we've got underway through particularly the good services of David Edgar, but also working in the Guild, working in tandem with UK Theatre and with the Independent Theatre Corporation, is it? ITC? Council, that's it. And it is called the New Play Commission Scheme. And it is a scheme that you will find all the details about on our website, the Writers Guild website. And it's basically that we have raised funds through donation and through Arts Council money to commission at least the first payment of 15, if not more, new plays. So please, if you're interested in a partnership with the theatre company, because it needs to be a partnership between the writer and the theatre company, and you have some ideas about that, then please visit our website. And I think it's on the homepage still, isn't it, Kate? Yeah. So please visit that, have a look at it. And as I say, we're hoping that 15 to 20 new plays will emerge as a result of that scheme. So on that note, I'll hand us back to Kate. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Kevin. Richard, I didn't want that to end, actually. I could have listened for another couple of hours. I hope everyone's picked up as many tips as I have. And I just want to say, if you missed the beginning of the session or you want to revisit it, we will have this posted shortly on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye open for that. If there's any of you who've joined us today who are not currently in membership, we'd love to hear more from you. Please engage with us. This is an amazing organisation. You've only got a taste of it today, particularly through what Richard was talking about. Richard is an amazing chair of our theatre committee, which is made up of volunteer members, some with an amazing experience, some who are relatively new to the industry. And you know, it's really only by hearing from other playwrights that we can act on your behalf. And believe me, there's very few people who get off the phone to me who do not join the guild subsequently, because it is doing such fantastic things for playwrights. Anyway, if you'd like to hear more, please have a look at our website. Check it out, see the kind of things that we're doing. We have an ongoing program of online events, and there will be a lot more to come. So even if you decide not to join the guild, you know, keep in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to sign off now before I keep jabbering on and on and on. But keep an eye open. We've got a lot more events coming up very, very soon. Okay, everyone. Bye-bye for now.